2012, you were quoted as saying, "I think the healthcare problem is the #1 problem of America and of American business. We have not dealt with that yet." Do you believe that the current administration's plan to repeal and replace ACA will ultimately benefit the economy and Berkshire or not?
Yeah. Well, I'll answer. I'll give you two answers here. The first one being that if you go back to 1960 or thereabouts, corporate taxes were about 4% of GDP. I mean, they bounced around some. And now they're about 2% of GDP. And at that time, healthcare was 5% of GDP, and now it's about 17% of GDP. So when American business talks about taxes strangling our competitiveness or that sort of thing, they're talking about something that as a percentage of GDP has gone down from 4 to 2, while medical costs, which are borne to a great extent by business, have gone from 5 to 17%. So medical costs are the tapeworm of American economic competitiveness. I mean, if you're really talking about it, and business knows that. They don't feel they can do much about it, but it is not. The tax system is not crippling Berkshire's competitiveness around the world or anything of the sort. Our health costs have gone up incredibly and will go up a lot more. And if you look at the rest of the world, there were a half a dozen countries that were around our 5% if you go back to the earlier years. And while we're at 17 now, they're at 10 or 11. So they have gained a 5 or 6 point advantage, the world, and even in these countries with fairly high medical costs.
And that's with socialized medicine.
Yeah. So it's a huge, whatever I said then goes and is accentuated now. And that isn't a problem. I mean, that is a problem the society is having trouble with and is going to have more trouble with. And regardless of which party's in power or anything of the sort, it almost transcends that. In terms of the new act, it was passed a couple days ago versus the Obama administration act. It's a very interesting thing. All I can tell you is the net effect of that act on one person is that my federal income taxes would have gone down 17% last year if what was proposed went into effect. So it is a huge tax cut for guys like me, and you'll have to figure out the effects of the rest of the act. But the one thing I can tell you is if it goes through the way the House put in, I mean, anybody with $250,000 a year of adjusted gross income and a lot of investment income is going to have a huge tax cut. And when there's a tax cut, either the deficit goes up or they get the taxes from somebody else. So as it stands now, that is the one predictable effect, if it should pass, is that the Senate will do something different and go to a conference and who knows what happens. But that is in the law that was passed a couple days ago. Charlie?
Well, I certainly agree with you about the medical care. What I don't like about the medical care is that a lot of it, we're getting too much medicine. There's too much chemotherapy on people that are all but dead. And all kinds of crazy things go on in Medicare and in other parts of the health system. And there's so many vested interests that it's very hard to change. But I don't think any rational person looking objectively from the outside at the American system of medical care. We all love the new life-saving stuff and the new chemotherapies and the new drugs and all that. But my God, this system is crazy. And the cost is just going wild. And it does put our manufacturers at a big disadvantage with other people where the government is paying the medical costs. And so I agree with Warren totally.
If you had to bet 10 years from now, we'll be at higher or lower than 17% of GDP.
Well, if present trends continue, get more and more, there are huge vested interests in having this thing continue the way it is. And they're very vocal and active, and the rest of us are indifferent. So naturally we get a terrible result. And I would say that on this issue, both parties hate each other so much that neither one of them can think rationally. And I don't think that helps either.
It's it is kind of interesting that, with the federal government spends raises, we'll say $3.5 trillion or something like that, and I mean the degree of concern everybody has about that, although that's stayed fairly steady in the 18% or so of GDP, plus or minus a couple points, but $3 trillion plus is spent on health care, and everybody wants the best, and it's perfectly understandable, but it's a it's a big number compared to the whole federal budget. I mean, there's some overlap and all of that, but it's, if you talk about world competitiveness of American industry, it's the biggest single variable where we keep getting more and more out of whack with the rest of the world. And it's very tough for political parties to attack it. It's, basically it's a political subject.